Council's mockery. The Galactic Council chamber was vast and filled with the voices of 100 species, each arguing, each certain of their own wisdom. The problem before them was simple to describe, but impossible to solve. An invading fleet from the outer veil had crushed 3 border systems already, and was moving with terrifying speed toward the inner trade lanes. Panic was thick in the chamber. Some species begged for negotiations, others cried out for evacuation, and a few whispered about surrender. In the middle of all that noise, the humans remained silent. They sat together, their expressions unreadable, watching the chaos swirl around them. When finally the High Speaker demanded that every representative speak their plan, many species offered excuses or fears. The Vurok said their fleets were too far. The Traylan said their armies could not stand against the firepower. The council shook with despair until it was the humans' turn. The representative, a woman named Captain Rena Holt, rose and simply said, "We have got this." The words hung in the air, simple and calm. For a moment there was silence, and then laughter broke out across the chamber. The Haskari ambassador struck the table with his claw and mocked the arrogance. The slender Althean envoy sneered, claiming that humans barely held their own colonies together. The councillors laughed because to them it was absurd that this young, short-lived, chaotic species thought it could do what great empires could not. But Rena did not argue. She did not raise her voice or wave her arms. She only repeated, "We have got this," and then sat back down. The laughter grew louder. Records of past human wars were brought up, their bloody victories dismissed as luck or desperation. Yet underneath the laughter, some members of the council felt a strange unease. There was something in the way the humans said it, not as boast, not as lie, but as if the outcome had already been decided, as if the danger did not frighten them, only challenged them. Those who had traded with humans before knew that strange certainty. When a human said those words, they acted as though the universe itself would bend until it was true. As the chamber erupted again, Rena and her fellow delegates exchanged quiet glances. They knew the council did not understand. They knew the alien fleets had never fought on Earth's battlefields or seen what humans did when pressed against the wall. The council expected panic, but humans lived with storms, wars, disasters, and endless trials on their homeworld. They were born in struggle and trained to endure. To them, survival was not a question, but a duty. And so they said, "We have got this," with the same tone one might use to promise that the sun would rise. When the meeting ended, the council dismissed humanity's claim as arrogance. Orders were made to fortify core systems, but secretly, most leaders expected disaster. The alien fleet was too strong, too many ships, too well supplied. The invasion looked unstoppable. Yet even as others lost hope, the humans were already moving. Fleets were mobilized in silence. Commanders met in hidden war rooms. Soldiers packed their gear with grim smiles. Pilots painted symbols of old Earth battles on their ships. Across every outpost and colony, the phrase spread like fire. "We have got this" was whispered in barracks, shouted on training fields, and carved into the hulls of carriers. The council believed it was a phrase of arrogance. The humans knew it was something else. It was their promise to one another. It meant no matter the odds, no matter the cost, they would not fail. When humans said "we have got this," they meant it with every drop of their history, with every scar of their species, with every memory of past survival. And as the alien fleet advanced, unaware of the storm it was about to face, the galaxy laughed while humanity quietly prepared to prove them all wrong. The human gamble. The human fleets did not move like the fleets of the great empires. The council was used to order and symmetry. Long lines of ships forming walls of fire, massive dreadnoughts at the center with escorts protecting them like jewels in a crown. Humans never fought that way. Instead, their ships scattered like sparks on the wind, small groups breaking away to jump into uncharted lanes, others diving toward asteroid belts or hiding in nebula storms. To the council observers, it looked chaotic, like a child scattering pieces from a game board. They whispered among themselves that humans had no plan, that they were charging to their deaths, that they were once again proving their reckless nature. But to the humans, every strange move was a calculation. Every risk had a purpose, Admiral. Joran Vale stood aboard the carrier Iron Resolve, his eyes fixed on the tactical maps glowing across the command deck. His staff officers reported sightings of the enemy fleet, massive in size and confidence, burning across space like a tidal wave. Vale only nodded and spoke in the same calm tone that Captain Rena Holt had used at the council. "We have got this." His words traveled across the fleet in coded signals and short bursts, reminding every crew that they were not just fighting for survival, but to show the galaxy the truth of what it meant to be human. The alien fleet advanced in a predictable wall, their power undeniable. They expected resistance to crumble before them. But when their forward ships pressed into the asteroid belt near Theta Draken, explosions bloomed around them. Human frigates had hidden deep inside the rocks, cloaking their signals and waiting, in silence. As the enemy passed, humans struck with sudden fury, cutting supply transports and blasting command ships before vanishing back into the shadows. The aliens tried to regroup, but then another attack came from behind a moon, and then another from ships that appeared as if from nowhere. Each strike was small, never enough to win alone, but together they began to bleed the invasion dry. The council observers who watched through hidden relays were baffled. They could not see order in the chaos. They did not understand why humans risked their small ship so carelessly, or why they attacked supply lines instead of confronting the main force. To them, it looked like madness. But the council began to notice something else too. Every time the aliens tried to retaliate, they found themselves outmaneuvered. Every time they thought they had trapped the humans, the trap snapped shut on them instead. The laughter that had filled the council chamber began to quiet as reports of human ambushes multiplied. On the ground, the same gamble played out. Human Marines landed on occupied colonies where the alien banners already flew. Instead of digging trenches and waiting for reinforcements, they moved like ghosts, striking convoys, sabotaging generators, rallying civilians to fight beside them. Whole planets that the council had already written off as lost began to resist. Villagers who had never fired a weapon stood shoulder to shoulder with armored soldiers because the humans told them, "We have got this," and they believed. The aliens were furious. Their commanders issued threats across the void, promising to crush every world and erase humanity from history. They called the humans reckless savages, but deep within their ranks a nervous whisper began to grow. The humans were not breaking. They were not fleeing. They were fighting with the calm certainty of a predator that had already chosen its prey. For the first time, the invaders felt doubt creep into their minds. Admiral Vale gathered his captains in a secure transmission. "The enemy is larger, stronger, more experienced in fleet battles," he admitted. "But we are not here to fight their war. We are here to fight our way. Every strike matters. Every risk we take spreads fear. They believe we are reckless, but we know the truth. We have got this." His officers nodded, some smiling through exhaustion, others holding back the fear in their hearts. None of them doubted his words. Because they were human, and when a human said those words, it was more than hope, it was a promise. The council watched and argued among themselves. Some still insisted that humanity was reckless and would eventually be crushed. Others began to wonder if they were witnessing something they had never seen before, something their long histories had never prepared them for. The gamble continued, the chaos spread, and slowly, piece by piece, the unstoppable invasion began to lose its certainty. Humanity had thrown the dice and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if those calm words would hold true shock on the battlefield. The first major clash came at the star system of Vera's Edge, where the alien fleet had gathered its strength in full display. They believed the humans would finally be forced to meet them head-on, and they were eager for the decisive strike that would crush resistance once and for all. Hundreds of their warships moved into formation, shining like blades against the black of space. While the council observers whispered that this would be the end of humanity's foolish gamble, yet when the battle began, nothing went as expected. Human ships darted into the system from multiple entry points, not in neat formations but scattered across the sky like hunters surrounding prey. The aliens unleashed heavy firepower at the first wave, only to watch the small human frigates vanish in sudden bursts of speed, decoys, left behind to confuse targeting systems. Then explosions tore through the rear of their formation as a hidden human strike group emerged from a gas cloud, and cut into supply carriers. Chaos rippled through the alien command structure as they tried to adjust, their orders clashing, their rigid doctrine collapsing under pressure they had not anticipated. Humans thrived in the chaos and pressed it harder with every passing minute. Aboard the destroyer, Lance of Dawn, Commander Arik Wren issued orders with steady calm. His ship weaved through firestorms, returning precise shots at weak points the aliens had not protected. His crew worked with silent focus, trusting in their training, trusting in his voice, trusting most of all in the phrase repeated again and again over comms. "We have got this." That phrase carried them through the storm as they performed maneuvers no other species would dare attempt. Engines screamed at the limits, hulls shuddered under pressure, yet the humans held on, and every risk turned into another strike against the enemy. The aliens grew furious as losses mounted. They tried to pin down the scattered human groups, but every time they committed ships to one direction, they left another flank exposed. Human fleets struck like knives, always at the weakest point, always vanishing before the hammer could fall. The alien commanders had prepared for a battle of strength, but instead they found themselves facing something alive, something that adapted with every breath. The phrase reckless that they had used in scorn now tasted bitter as it turned into fear. This was not recklessness. This was something they could not predict and could not stop. On the ground, the shock was even greater. Human Marines landed on Vera Prime, where the alien garrisons had prepared overwhelming defenses. Instead of frontal assaults, the humans scattered into the cities, turning every street into a battlefield. They fought in shadows, used civilian networks, turned abandoned factories into traps. The aliens fired heavy weapons, but their morale began to waver as every advance cost them dearly. Civilians joined the resistance without hesitation. A farmer threw a grenade into a supply depot. Children carried messages across ruined streets. Everywhere the invaders turned, they faced the stubborn defiance of a species that simply refused to break council observers, could not deny what they saw. Reports of human victories were no longer isolated strikes but patterns of relentless resistance. The laughter that had once filled the council chamber was gone. In its place grew a silence heavy with disbelief. Could this really be the same species they had dismissed as unstable and weak? A race that lived on a death world and yet claimed to thrive in it, had brought those lessons into the stars. Now the council began to understand that when humans said "we have got this," they were not boasting but promising. As the battle dragged on, alien fleets tried to retreat to regroup, but humans anticipated even that. Traps had already been laid, mines hidden in trade routes, ambush squadrons waiting at exit points. One by one ships exploded or were captured. The once mighty armada staggered away, bloodied and humiliated, while the humans remained standing, battered, but unbroken. Admiral Vale's message to the council was simple. The enemy is learning that we do not bluff. They know now what those words mean. We have got this. The galaxy had expected the end of humanity. Instead, it had witnessed the birth of something terrifying and undeniable. For the first time, the council realized that the humans were not just fighting for themselves. They were reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy with nothing more than determination, cunning, and the promise bound within a simple phrase. And as survivors whispered about the Battle of Vera's Edge, even their enemies began to wonder what humanity might do next. The turning point. The alien fleet had suffered more than they ever admitted, but they were not finished. Their leaders were proud and merciless, determined to erase the humiliation that humanity had forced upon them. So they brought forth their strongest weapon, a colossal warship built over decades, a fortress that dwarfed entire cities. It was called the Obliterator by its enemies, and it was said that no fleet could survive its wrath. When word reached the Galactic Council that the supership had entered the war, fear spread like wildfire. Species that had once mocked humanity now whispered that perhaps nothing could stop such a force. In the chamber of the council, silence reigned as news arrived that the Obliterator was moving toward a cluster of core worlds, its guns capable of burning continents in a single strike. The council argued about retreat and evacuation. They spoke of surrendering those systems to save others. In the middle of their panic, the human representatives did not waver. Rena Holt stood again and repeated the same words she had spoken at the beginning. "We have got this." The chamber erupted with disbelief. Some called her delusional. Others begged her to be realistic, but the humans were already making plans. They did not see the Obliterator as invincible. They saw it as a challenge to be met. Head-on, Admiral Vale gathered his captains in the darkened command hall of the Iron Resolve. The holographic image of the enemy ship towered over them, bristling with weapons and shielded by layers of armor. Many stared in silence, awed by its size. Vale did not allow despair. He spoke calmly, outlining a plan that no other species would have dared to attempt. They would not try to match the enemy's strength. They would use speed, cunning, and sacrifice. Small strike groups would dive into the defenses, hunting weak points that only a human eye could see. Others would feign retreat, drawing the monster away from supply lanes. At the heart of the plan was a desperate strike against the reactor core, a mission so dangerous it promised death to those who attempted it. Vale finished by saying the only words that mattered. "We have got this." The fleet moved quickly, scattering into shadows once more. The Obliterator arrived at the edge of Hellion Prime, its guns tearing through defense satellites with contemptuous ease. Entire colonies trembled as the sky burned with its fire. Civilians cried out to the Council for help, and the Council in turn begged the humans for reassurance. Vale responded with a simple transmission that was broadcast across every world. "Do not be afraid. We are here. We have got this." His voice carried a strength that could not be measured in weapons, and millions felt hope ignite, even as the alien supership loomed above them. The first wave of human ships attacked in sudden fury, swarming the edges of the Obliterator like hornets. They struck at turrets, sensors, and hangar bays, knowing they could not destroy it but determined to wound it. The alien commanders laughed at the futility, their massive guns ripping through dozens of frigates in blazing counterfire. Yet even as human ships exploded, others pressed forward without hesitation. Each sacrifice exposed another weak point, another opening for the next wave. The aliens soon discovered that their shields, while strong against concentrated fire, could not easily defend against endless small strikes from every angle. The human gamble was working. On the surface of Hellion Prime, civilians watched the battle, in awe. They saw tiny ships hurl themselves against the giant, fighting with reckless courage. For the first time, the wider galaxy began to understand the meaning behind the human phrase. It was not arrogance, it was determination. It was the belief that no matter how vast the enemy, no matter how certain the defeat, humanity would always rise and strike until victory was carved from impossibility. As the battle raged on, Admiral Vale prepared the final phase. A squadron of bombers led by Commander Arik Wren would dive straight into the heart of the Obliterator, targeting the reactor core. Everyone in the fleet knew the mission was suicide, but no one questioned it. When the order came, Wren only smiled grimly and said the words again for his crew. "We have got this." Engines roared as the bombers broke formation and streaked toward the massive hull. The enemy opened fire with everything they had, but the humans did not turn away. They pressed forward into the firestorm, ready to gamble everything on one final strike. The galaxy held its breath as humanity faced the turning point, daring to challenge the weapon that was supposed to be unstoppable. What came next would either end their fight or prove once and for all that, when humans spoke their phrase, they meant it. Sacrifice and fury. The squadron led by Commander Arik Wren tore through the void toward the towering shape of the Obliterator. The alien supership filled the stars with its mass, its hull bristling with weapons, its shields glowing like a wall of fire. Every other species would have turned away at the sight of such overwhelming power, but the humans did not slow. They dove straight into the storm, engines burning bright, weapons blazing at every turret that tried to pin them down. Behind them, the rest of the human fleet fought to keep the monster distracted, throwing themselves into desperate clashes with escorts and launching attack after attack at its flanks. It was not enough to win, but it was enough to buy seconds, and for humanity, seconds meant everything. Wren's voice filled the cockpits of his squadron, calm but fierce. "We knew this would be the hardest fight of our lives," he said, "but we are here because no one else can do it. Remember what we stand for." Remember who we are. His words steadied the hands of pilots who knew they might never return. One by one, they responded with the same phrase that had carried them through every impossible battle. We have got this. Their voices were tired, some cracked with fear, but not one of them turned away. They pressed forward into the hail of enemy fire. The obliterator unleashed its fury. Beams of light carved across space, shredding human bombers in flashes of fire. Explosions painted the darkness as comrades vanished in silence, their sacrifice leaving holes in the squadron that others immediately filled. Every loss cut deep, but none allowed grief to slow their hands. Each fallen ship meant the survivors were closer to their goal. Shields screamed under impact. Hulls groaned. Alarms blared, but still they pressed on. The alien commanders watching from their throne of steel began to realize the truth. These humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win even if death was certain. On the ground of Helion Prime, civilians and soldiers alike watched the battle unfold across the skies. Every explosion was felt in their hearts. Some wept, some prayed, but none looked away. They saw the tiny bombers streaking toward the giant, and they felt pride stronger than fear. Even children who had never held a weapon whispered the phrase they had learned from the humans. We have got this. The words became a chant across bunkers and shelters, echoing in the minds of those who believed in humanity's promise inside. The obliterator, alien officers grew frantic. Reports screamed of damage across multiple decks, of fires raging out of control, of systems failing under constant harassment. They ordered more power to shields, more weapons brought to bear, but nothing stopped the humans. For every bomber destroyed, another seemed to appear, clawing its way closer. The alien commander shouted that the humans were insane, that they should have broken long ago, but the truth was worse. The humans were not insane. They were determined. They were willing to burn themselves out completely if it meant victory. Commander, Ren's bomber broke through the last wave of defenses, his ship battered and scarred, but still alive. The reactor core loomed ahead, a monstrous engine pulsing with power, the heart of the obliterator. His crew exchanged a single glance, no words needed. They all understood the cost. Ren opened the comm channel to the fleet and spoke with steady certainty. This is the moment. Hold the line out there. We have got this. Then he drove his ship into the attack, weapons locked on the weak point that sensors had identified through layers of armor. His bomber streaked like a spear of light straight into the beast's heart. Behind him, others followed, each pilot knowing what it meant. One after another, the bombers hurled themselves into the core, detonating payloads in blinding flashes. The alien ship shuddered under the impact, its shields flickering, its armor cracking. The council observers watching the battle gasped in disbelief as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. Humanity was doing what no empire had ever dared. They were tearing the monster apart piece by piece with nothing but courage and sacrifice. The alien fleet faltered as shock rippled through their ranks. They had believed the obliterator invincible, a symbol of their dominance. Now it staggered like a wounded beast. The humans pressed harder, driven not by orders but by the shared conviction that this fight mattered more than their lives. Every cockpit, every command deck, every trench on the ground, the phrase repeated again and again. We have got this. It was no longer just words. It was a vow carved into the soul of a species that refused to surrender. As the obliterator shook under the fury of human strikes, the galaxy finally understood why the Council had been wrong to laugh. Humanity did not measure strength by numbers or technology. They measured it by heart, by the willingness to give everything so others could live. And in that moment of fire and sacrifice, the balance of the war began to change. The final blow. The obliterator groaned like a dying giant as explosions rippled across its hull. Fire blossomed from the wounds carved into its armored sides, and its mighty guns flickered as power conduits failed one by one. The alien commander inside shouted frantic orders, his voice breaking as he demanded that the crew restore control. But panic had spread even through the hardened soldiers of the invader fleet. They had been raised to believe their flagship was indestructible, the ultimate proof of their empire's superiority. Now they watched in disbelief as human bombers and frigates continued to hurl themselves into the storm. Fearless, merciless, relentless. Admiral Vale stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, his gaze locked on the tactical screen that displayed the wounded beast. His officers reported mounting casualties, ships destroyed, crews lost to the void. Each name cut into his soul, but he did not allow his voice to tremble. He spoke calmly as he gave the final order. All ships, press forward. Do not let the giant recover. We have got this. His words carried through every comm channel, filling the ears of weary soldiers who had fought for hours without rest. When they heard him, they straightened in their seats, their hands steadied on controls and their hearts filled again with determination. The human fleet surged like a wave. Frigates darted into the gaps in the enemy's defenses, cruisers unleashed, concentrated fire on weakened points of armor, and carriers launched every last fighter they had left. The sky was filled with streaks of light as missiles and torpedoes slammed into the obliterator. Each strike shook the monster more violently, until entire sections of plating tore away, spinning into the void. The council observers watched in silence, their disbelief growing with every passing second. They had thought the humans reckless, fools, yet here they were, facing the impossible and bending it to their will. Inside the alien command deck, the situation grew desperate. Fires raged across corridors, hull breaches claimed entire crews, and life support systems failed. The commander tried to rally his soldiers, but fear had replaced discipline. They had never trained for this, never imagined an enemy that would keep coming even as death consumed them. Reports came in that human troops had boarded through the broken hangar bays, small squads fighting their way inside. The commander realized, too late, that the battle was already lost. Not because of numbers or weapons, but because the humans had decided they would win, and nothing could change that. Commander Arik Wren's sacrifice had opened the path, but others were ready to finish it. One squad of Marines fought their way through the burning corridors, their armor scorched and their ammunition running low. At their head was Sergeant Lyra Kane, her voice steady as she guided her team toward the reactor. She knew the ship was already failing, but she also knew that if they could deliver the final strike, it would end the battle completely. Her soldiers moved without hesitation, some falling under alien fire, others carrying wounded comrades, all repeating the phrase that had carried them this far. We have got this. They reached the reactor chamber, a cathedral of energy glowing with unstable power. The enemy defenders tried to hold them back, but the humans pressed forward with fury. Grenades burst, rifles blazed, and hand-to-hand combat raged among the twisting metal. One by one, the defenders fell until the chamber was silent, except for the roar of the core. Lyra signaled her remaining soldiers to plant charges along the conduits. They worked quickly, knowing the cost, knowing the blast would claim them too. As they armed the final device, she spoke into her comm, her voice calm despite the fire around her. For Earth, for every world that still believes, for every voice that whispered those words. We have got this. Admiral Vale listened in silence as the transmission ended. A heartbeat later, the explosion tore through the reactor. The obliterator shuddered, its lights flickering, its weapons falling silent. Then, in a blinding wave of fire, the giant finally broke apart, fragments scattering across the system. The shockwave rolled through the battlefield as alien ships scrambled. In terror, their morale shattered. The Council's observers gasped, unable to believe that the great weapon of the invaders had fallen to a species they once mocked. Human ships burned and limped in the aftermath, their losses staggering, their survivors exhausted. Yet on every comm channel, the same words echoed again and again, spoken with pride and grief alike. We have got this. It was more than victory. It was proof. Humanity had faced the strongest weapon the enemy possessed, and had destroyed it through sacrifice, courage, and unbreakable will. The tide of war had shifted, and the galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The galaxy remembers. The wreckage of the obliterator drifted across the stars like a broken crown, its shattered pieces glowing with dying fire as they tumbled into the void. Where once it had been a symbol of fear and domination, now it was nothing more than ruins scattered among the corpses of ships and the memories of those who had given their lives to destroy it. For the human fleet, there was no cheering, No triumphant victory songs, only silence mixed with exhaustion and grief. Thousands had fallen, entire squadrons erased, yet every survivor knew that their sacrifice had bought something greater than survival. It had proven to the galaxy that humanity's words were not empty, that when they said "we have got this," they meant it with every heartbeat of their existence. On Helion Prime, the civilians who had watched the battle unfold poured out from shelters and bunkers, staring up at the sky that still burned with fragments of fire. Children who had whispered the human phrase during the darkest hours now shouted it openly in the streets. Soldiers and farmers stood together, raising their voices, in defiance of the enemy that had tried to crush them. The spirit of humanity had spread beyond their species, touching every alien who had stood on that world and witnessed the unshakable resolve of those who refused to bend. Across the planet the chant rose higher and louder, until even the Council, observers who had doubted them, could not deny its power. The alien fleet, once so confident, had broken. Some fled into the depths of space, abandoning their mission, while others surrendered outright when human ships pressed their attack. Panic spread through their empire as the news traveled faster than light, telling every world that the invincible weapon had fallen. The same commanders who had once laughed at humanity now spoke in hushed tones about the species that did not know fear, the species that had turned certain death into victory. Where before they had mocked the phrase as arrogance, now they whispered it themselves as a warning. When humans said "we have got this," the wise thing was to step aside. Weeks later, the Galactic Council convened once more in the same chamber where laughter had once echoed at Rena Holt's calm words. This time there was no laughter. Every representative arrived in silence, their eyes turning to the human delegation as soon as they entered. The chamber that had once ridiculed them now waited in reverence, fearful and curious to hear what humanity would say. Rena stood again, her uniform worn from the war but her voice steady. "The crisis is not over," she said. "Enemies remain, dangers wait in the dark. But we have shown what we can do. We did not fight for glory or conquest. We fought because it was needed. And if need arises again, we will stand as we always have. We have got this." Not one voice rose in mockery. Not one ambassador scoffed. The words that had once sounded foolish now carried the weight of victory and sacrifice. Some nodded in respect, others bowed their heads, and even those who feared humanity could not deny the truth. The phrase was no longer a curiosity. It was a promise the galaxy would never forget. In the months that followed, when new threats emerged along the fringes of civilization, eyes always turned toward the humans. And when their representatives repeated the same simple phrase, the Council no longer laughed. They believed for humanity. Itself, the war became a memory carved deep into their spirit. Families mourned the fallen. Monuments rose on worlds where sacrifices had been made, and the names of heroes like Commander Wren and Sergeant Kane were spoken with reverence. Yet alongside grief, there was pride, because every human knew they had stood together against impossible odds and proven to the galaxy that their species was not to be underestimated. They had not claimed invincibility, they had not promised ease, but they had sworn with quiet certainty that they would endure. And they had the phrase spread far beyond human space. Traders, soldiers, even scholars from other worlds adopted it, sometimes with awe, sometimes with fear, but always with recognition of what it meant. It was no longer just human words. It had become a galactic truth, a reminder that there was a species that would fight until the end and beyond, that would never abandon allies, that would never back down. In every council chamber, in every battlefield, in every whispered story of the war, the phrase echoed. We have got this, and so the galaxy remembered. Humanity had come from a world that bred survivors, from a history of fire and struggle, from a nature that refused surrender. They had faced the greatest weapon of the invaders and broken it through will alone. They had reshaped the balance of power not with numbers or machines, but with belief in one another. When they said we have got this, the galaxy finally understood that it was not just words but the unshakable truth of their existence. And from that day forward, no one laughed. The meaning of the words. The war that had begun with fear and laughter ended with silence and respect. The galaxy looked upon the humans with new eyes, for they had proven that strength was not only measured in fleets and weapons, but in conviction and sacrifice. The wreckage of the Obliterator became a monument floating in the void, a grave for the invincible myth that had once terrified worlds. Across colonies and core systems, the name of humanity was no longer spoken with scorn, but with caution and reverence. The Council recorded in their archives that the species once dismissed as reckless had shown a power no one else possessed, the power to turn despair into victory by sheer will. Among the humans there was no boasting. They buried their dead with honor, they rebuilt their fleets, they held vigils for the voices lost in the dark. Yet everywhere they went the words returned. Children in villages whispered them to each other before sleep. Soldiers etched them into the handles of their rifles. Pilots painted them onto the hulls of their ships. "We have got this" became more than a phrase, it was the heartbeat of a species and the promise they carried into every challenge ahead. For humans did not need to declare themselves rulers or conquerors. They only needed to promise each other that, no matter how grim the odds, they would stand together. The Council called for another meeting when new tensions rose on the far edge of explored space. Delegates argued as always, but this time their voices faltered when fear took hold. All eyes turned to the humans waiting at the edge of the chamber. Rena Holt rose once more, her uniform bearing the marks of war, but her face calm. She looked across the gathered species who now sat in silence and spoke the same words she had spoken at the very beginning of the struggle. "We have got this." And for the first time in history, every voice in the chamber accepted those words as truth. Generations would pass and stories would grow around the phrase. Scholars would study its meaning. Soldiers would shout it before charges, families would whisper it when facing storms and disasters. It would no longer belong to humans alone, but to a galaxy that had learned from them that there is no greater weapon than conviction. The invaders who had once unleashed their terror had been broken, and their empire had crumbled not because of machines or numbers, but because of one promise that humans had never failed to keep. And so across the stars, in every language, in every world, the words lived on. When humans said, "We have got this," they meant it. The galaxy never forgot. The end